Hello again, everyone. Ariel Helwani here, being joined by Brett Okamoto and Marc Raimondi of ESPN. We are minutes removed from one of the best fights of 2020. We all kind of predicted that Dan Hooker versus Dustin Poirier would turn out to be one of the best fights of 2020, and perhaps it even exceeded our expectations. In the end, Dustin Poirier wins via decision, a phenomenal fight with massive stakes attached to it. Both guys delivered. It was an incredible night of fights from top to bottom, and we're going to talk about it all right here on the post-fight wrap-up show. First off, let me go to you, Brett. You are actually at the Apex in Las Vegas. I know it's a very different scene than your typical Las Vegas fight night, but can you describe what the feeling is like right now, just like I said, minutes removed from that amazing main event?
That's quiet. There aren't many people in here to start off with, and then once the event's over, I mean, these guys, Ariel, it's a well-oiled machine when it comes to breaking stuff down and getting people moving. And actually, most of the media is not in the Apex. They're in a tent that's outside of the Apex. So right now, I actually think right at this moment, the press conference is going on. And that's where, much of the action is right now. This Apex, as far as the actual facility itself and around the octagon, it clears out almost immediately. You got Anik and Bisping and those guys, still filming some stuff. But for the most part, it's just, tear things down. And I would say get ready for next week. But next week, we're actually not in Las Vegas. They're headed to Fight Island. Not next week, but next month.
Yep. And Marc, I'll get you in a second, but I'm just curious, Brett, did you watch the fight in the arena? And if so, what was it like watching a fight like that in an empty arena? Because at home, it seemed like we could appreciate the fight even more so because we could hear the punches and the kicks and all that stuff. I would imagine inside the Apex, and if you were there and it was empty, you can appreciate it even more so.
Yeah, I didn't watch much of this main event from out in the Apex because I was in the back doing some video interviews. But I have had the opportunity to watch a lot of fights actually inside the Apex during the stretch, and it is like that. It reminds me of the Contender Series. I've been at the Contender Series, but even at the Contender Series, you've got a crowd of about 50 people last year. Friends and family from the fighter and his opponent, and then the rest of the fighters on the card. So you add up all those people together, and you have a decent amount of people there. Fighters would come in, whoever's in Las Vegas, whether they live there or are training there, or they just happen to be passing through. Like, oh, we'll go to the Contender Series. So there's always a good amount of people in there, even for those Contender Series fights. But these ones, and especially when you get the really high level guys, like a Dustin Poirier and a Hooker, a Dan Hooker, you hear those sounds even more because there's a difference when Dustin Poirier is hitting somebody than a Contender Series guy.
Oh, what a fun fight. Marc, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of controversy attached to this one. Did you agree with the judges?
Absolutely. I had a 48-47 for Dustin Poirier. I had Hooker winning the first two rounds and then Poirier winning rounds 3, 4, and 5. And I just looked, Ariel, at the judges' scorecards, and that's exactly how every single judge had it. They had Hooker in 1 and 2, Poirier in 3, 4, and 5, and one judge gave Poirier a 10-8 in the fourth. And that's that's pretty simple scorecards.
Would you agree with the assessment that it lived up and may have exceeded our expectations?
I mean, how could it not? It was, for me, that was the best fight of the pandemic era, if you want to call it that. All respect to Josh Emmett and Shane Burgos, which I thought that fight was just phenomenal last week. I thought this one exceeded it. I would say that Poirier Hooker was even better than I thought it would be. It was just a fantastic fight. The way that Poirier was able to kind of withstand Hooker's early onslaught and then just outlast him late in the fight. I mean, just a tremendous fight in every aspect.
So, Brett, Marc says best fight of the pandemic era. Hard to argue with that. Is it possible it's the best fight of 2020? It seemed like most people up until this point thought Zhang Weili versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk back in March, the last card prior to the pandemic hitting the world, was the best fight of the year. Did this one surpass it in your opinion?
No, not quite for me. I was jumped on SportsCenter right after the fight, and they asked that. Is this the best fight of the year? And I said, it's the best male fight of the year. I still think overall, the females, that was such a special night, such a great performance by both. And not that this one wasn't, but when you're talking fight of the year, it's always splitting hairs. For me personally, I have Zhang Weili and Joanna Jędrzejczyk, but if someone were to say this one, I wouldn't argue with you too much.
And did you agree with the scorecards as well?
Yeah, to Marc's point, I actually thought it was a pretty easy fight to score. I think that a lot of people, when they're watching those rounds, it's just human nature. I think I even had the same inclination. I was like, man, this is going to be a tough fight to score. But then when you really looked at each round individually, I mean, it was pretty clear that, I thought Hooker was doing a lot of damage early, especially with some of the leg kicks and the body work he had in the first 2 rounds. And then Poirier, man, I mean, you just got to give this guy so much credit. I think it's so impressive that you think about the gauntlet that he went through to get a title fight. Eddie Alvarez, Justin Gaethje, Anthony Pettis. He had tough fights to get to that point, and then he has a heartbreaking loss in a championship. He feels like his entire career was building up to that moment, and he comes up short. To then come back and fight a guy like Dan Hooker, who's extremely hungry, and to lose the first 2 rounds of that fight, I mean, it'd just be so easy for Dustin Poirier to pack it in and not. It takes a lot to come back and win the last 3 rounds against Dan Hooker in that fight under those circumstances. So I give Dustin Poirier all the credit in the world for winning this fight.
Yeah, his maturation as a fighter and also as a human being has been so much fun to watch. Everything that he's doing with the Good Fight Foundation with his wife, Jolie, winning that award yesterday from the UFC, giving him that Forrest Griffin Community Award. It's just been amazing to see the kind of person that he's become and the kind of fighter. I mean, to your point, it's been really incredible to watch. And some people thought that Khabib may have broken him, that he wouldn't be the same. It looks like, first 2 rounds, maybe those predictions are coming true, and then he turns it around. His chin, especially in that second round, just unbelievable, the amount of shots that he was taking. And, on the flip side, Mark, you have Dan Hooker, who's fighting, in his first high-profile main event. I know he had the fight against Paul Felder back at home, and that was a big deal, but this one felt a little bigger. It's amazing. He's only a year younger than Dustin Poirier, yet he seems a lot younger because he's newer to the scene. If I'm him, I don't like put my head down going back home to New Zealand, right? Like there's a lot that he can walk away from this with being happy and proud of, right?
Of course. I mean, first of all, the first thing you have to think about is he came all the way from New Zealand during a pandemic to fight Dustin Poirier in Las Vegas. He flew halfway around the world to do this. He's in New Zealand. He obviously no one is training at their fullest right now because gyms are closed, things are in lockdown, and his area is in lockdown, even though they've done a really good job, New Zealand, in containing the coronavirus. But I mean, it's a hard task. No one is training at 100%, and for him to come here and do as well as he did it against Dustin Poirier, who again one of the elite lightweights for a very long time. To me, Dan Hooker is one of the elite lightweights as well. I think he lost, but I don't see his stock going down in any way, shape, or form after this fight.
So after the fight, I tweeted that I want to see Tony Ferguson versus Dustin Poirier. And I know there's a lot of people who say, oh, Ferguson is coming off a loss. Let's not kid ourselves, guys. He was on an incredible winning streak, one of the greatest of all time, stumbles against Justin Gaethje, who's about to fight for the belt. To me, it's a fight that, I think anyone, regardless of winning streaks or whatever, just stylistically would love to see. And it makes all the sense in the world. Poirier tweeted moments later saying, like, let me rest. And I understand that. I'm just saying at some point down the line, I'd love to see that next for them. Brett, let me ask you, who do you want to see Dustin Poirier fight after this big win?
Ariel, was that to me? You were breaking up there just a little bit.
Yeah, who do you want to see Dustin Poirier fight after this big win?
Is Conor McGregor available? Because that to me would sure make a lot of sense. One thing that Dustin told me when I was talking to him this week is he said that he lives and dies with every result. He's been like that his entire career. And he really just devastates him when he loses. And so that does add a little bit of pressure on himself. But then I asked, has that ever impacted you really negatively in a fight performance? And he said, I really only feel that it impacted me negatively in one, and that was when I lost to Conor McGregor. He just felt like he wasn't himself. He was too riled up for that fight. He put way too much pressure on himself that was a must-win fight. And then it was over in the first round. So I think that's interesting. I think that Poirier obviously deserves a fight against Conor McGregor. The UFC has made it pretty clear that they would like Conor McGregor to fight for a championship soon, which I get it. I totally understand that. I'm not even all that completely opposed to it, but Conor McGregor's been saying he wants to be active. He's been saying he wants to come back. If he wants to come back right now and he doesn't want to wait for that title fight, to me, Dustin Poirier is 1,000% the fight to make.
Who's your pick, Mark, for next for Poirier?
Conor was actually the first name that came to my mind because I know that Dustin has been pushing to get that rematch back. I mean, it's been a long time since those guys have fought. It's been 6 years. Both guys are very different. The question for me is, is that the fight that McGregor really wants? Because he talked a lot about, when he spoke to you, Ariel, about, being excited to fight again and, finding an opportunity that really excited him. And it almost happened with Anderson Silva, but then it kind of didn't. And the UFC kind of poo-pooed that from the beginning. I don't know if Dustin Poirier, with all respect to him, I think he's phenomenal, is that guy for Conor right now because they've already fought once and Conor beat him in the first round. But, I mean, for me, I would love to see that fight again 100%. The one person I was thinking of who is not, a Conor McGregor is maybe someone like Charles Oliveira, who's on a very long winning streak right now. It would be a very similar fight to Poirier versus Dan Hooker. Poirier, who's still kind of, trying to hold down the fort as far as one of the elite guys in the division, and Charles Oliveira is on his way up. He's on a long winning streak. So it'll be that kind of a fight. But Tony Ferguson wouldn't be a bad choice either. Look, it's the UFC 155-pound division. You can just throw the names in a hat, pick out matchups, and every single fight will be phenomenal.
All right, so both guys transported to the local hospital afterwards. We hope that they're okay, no serious injuries. And interesting to note that Dan Hooker telling us earlier in the week that when he flies back home tomorrow, he's going to have to go to a hotel in New Zealand, quarantine for 14 days, not see his family. I mean, he's sacrificing a lot, taking part in all of this, and it's unfortunate for him that he's unable to go home with the victory. But like we said, definitely has a lot to be proud of. Let's talk about the co-main event, Mike Perry defeating Mickey Gall. And I don't know if there had ever been so much talk about a corner situation in the history of the UFC. And I think we were all very upset, at least at home, Brett, that we couldn't watch what happened in between the first and second. They rectified it going into the third, and they showed us what was going on in the corner with Mike Perry having just his girlfriend, Latori Gonzalez, in his corner, just one corner person there with him, and it's his girlfriend who doesn't have a lot of MMA experience, but it worked out well because Perry looked great and he won the fight. So in the end, what's your takeaway from what Perry did out there, and in particular, the decision to just have his girlfriend in his corner?
I'll tell you what, I think it worked out great for him, as you said, and I think knowing what we know now, and this is just our perspective from the outside, right? But I think it maybe was a brilliant move. I just got the sense from Mike, he had a big chip on his shoulder this week, that he's talking about haters online, and he's talking about, if you kind of read between the lines of some of the things he's saying, that, hey, it's me out there. It's not my corner. It's me. I don't want a coach telling me what to do. I want a friend more than a coach. I want it to be a collaboration. I don't want to be told what to do, and I think that Mike has some confidence in what he thinks and how he knows himself, and that maybe he has had some experiences that have just not been very positive with coaches. So if this was a one-time thing, which it does sound like it is, I talked to him after the fight. He says he wants to work out with Jorge Masvidal. He says he wants to work out with Yoel Romero. He shares management team with both those guys. If he goes off and does that, then I think that we could all look back at this as a really big positive. That Mike Perry, had wanted to prove something maybe to his haters, or wanted to prove something to anybody he'll work with in the future, or maybe just to himself, that he could go out there with just his girlfriend and go out and win a fight. So it could be the type of thing that really, it could impact his career in a positive way, I think. At the same time, maybe, he won't do that, and he'll continue to have, just his girlfriend in the corner, or whomever it is. And I do think that there is going to be some obvious drawbacks to that. I do think that, if you're fighting at the top level of the UFC, which Mike Perry is, if you go back and look at the people that he's fighting, he's facing very, very tough competition in the UFC. I think there's going to come times where you're exhausted and you need that technical advice, or you just need a fresh set of eyeballs that see something that you're not able to see in the octagon. I think that time will come for him. But hey, like I said, if it was a one-off thing, he looked very happy tonight. I think it was a positive for him, and then maybe he can use this to then go say, hey, I do. This is how I want coaches, but this is how I want them to coach me. And I think this kind of gives him the opportunity to lay that out to certain people.
Mark, as our resident commission expert over at ESPN.com, do you have any issues with the Nevada State Athletic Commission allowing this to happen? A week ago, Bob Bennett says that, they're going to investigate the Robert Drysdale, Max Roshkoff situation. And here we have, a girlfriend in the corner, lone corner person with no real experience doing this before. Do you have any issues with this?
I have some mixed feelings, Ariel, about this, because, again, Mike Perry won. And as far as what Brett said, Brett was right on. Mike Perry is not a guy that you can just kind of drop in any training camp in the United States and have it be like a one-size-fits-all situation. He really does need, he's just a different kind of guy, which is okay. And you know what? It works for him when he's able to express that, which he did tonight. On the other hand, my feeling on the corner situation is that is a licensed commission position, a licensed state position. And the corner person is there to, in part, take care of the fighter. Now, if Mike Perry had been in trouble in that fight in any respect, if he was damaged, if he was hurt, it's up to the corner person, by getting the license from the commission, to evaluate that fighter and then to make adjustments from there, depending on what that is, whether that's telling them a different technique, a new tactic, or throwing in the towel. And frankly, all respect to Latori Gonzalez, and I'm happy for them. They seem very happy together. But it could be a potentially dangerous situation to have someone so inexperienced in the corner. This is MMA. It is a brutal sport. It's a dangerous sport. Things can go sideways very quickly, and people can get hurt. very quickly. So I would like to see some kind of, I mean, it's a bad precedent to set. Everything worked out fine tonight. I think that's great. I think that I'm not saying that there should be any kind of criteria, for a license to be a corner, because that's kind of also like a slippery slope, because then how do you determine who is who? Like Sam Alvey's wife is in his corner every time. She does train, but she's in his corner every time. So it's a little bit of a slippery slope, but I mean, in my opinion, there shouldn't be someone with that lack of inexperience in combat sports in a fighter's corner, just for health and safety reasons.
Brett, top to bottom, since they moved over to the Apex, this might have been the best card in terms of the results. And maybe on paper, not the biggest names, but the actual fights were tremendous from top to bottom. In addition to Mike Perry and Dustin Poirier, the other big winners, Maurice Greene, Brendan Allen, Takashi Sato, Julian Erosa taking a fight on just days' notice and picking up a huge win over Sean Woodson, Kama Worthy with another huge win, Tanner Boser, Kay Hansen picking up a win in her UFC debut, and of course, Yusuf Zalal and the current jerker. Any other particular performance fighter moment that you want to highlight before we move on?
I mean, you listed off quite a few there, and you're right. This card, we were saying in the back, this card was very entertaining, had some great storylines. I thought the best storyline was Julian Erosa. He was a guy who has been to the UFC twice and has been cut from the UFC twice, and it just, was on The Ultimate Fighter, was on Contender Series. I mean, this guy has been through every single method and path you can get to get into the UFC. And as of, earlier this year, he wasn't in there. And he was just staying ready because he knew that he had an opportunity living in Las Vegas, that if a fight fell through, I want an opportunity to get in there. And not only did he do that, and he stayed in a weight, and just cardiovascularly, he was in a position to accept a fight, but then win a fight as a massive, massive underdog against a guy who was undefeated, who had a lot of hype behind him, in Sean Woodson. So I thought that was a feel-good story of the night. You got Julian Erosa, a guy from Las Vegas, loses that first round, but then says, you know what, to beat this guy, I just got to drive forward. I got to get in his face. And then he did it and pulls off the biggest upset of the entire night. I thought that was pretty cool.
What about you, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few really, interesting stories coming out of this card. Maurice Greene getting that very strange arm triangle choke, I guess, from the bottom against Jean Vellante. He was so emotional afterwards. He's uprooting his family and moving to Albuquerque, New Mexico to train with Jackson Wink, permanently. It was a tear-filled post-fight interview he did with John Anik. That was it's emotional to see. I'm a big fan of Brendan Allen also. Brendan Allen, only 24 years old, middleweight contender. I really like what he showed tonight on the feet. He's really good on the ground, trains a group of sport, and those guys have a formula, obviously, to make elite fighters in many UFC divisions. So I'm excited for that. I mean, really, there was a lot of bright spots in this card. I mean, a lot of finishes, a lot of fun fights, a lot of just out of the ordinary things. Just a really enjoyable night, I thought, overall.
Let's put a bow on the Apex events as we move ahead to July, and of course the events in Abu Dhabi. So overall, I think the UFC has to look at this as a massive success, right? None of the fighters scheduled to compete on any of the cards tested positive. We did have some situations where corner people tested positive, and thus fights were canceled, but none of the big fights. So never a massive blow, with all due respect to those fighters, to any of the cards. The fights were a lot of fun. You had the 25-foot cage. You had great moments like tonight's main event, Burgos Emmett, Amanda Nunes. You had the Sean O'Malley and Cody Garbrandt fights. The list goes on and on. Brett, I'll start with you as we now put a bow on these Apex events. And of course, the UFC will be back in August for a string of events at the Apex. What was the fight, or maybe the moment, the performance that really stood out from these several weeks in Las Vegas, back in Las Vegas for the UFC?
Yeah, for me, I go all the way back to the first main event, Gilbert Burns versus Tyron Woodley. I mean, it's easy to kind of think Poirier Hooker, that's almost, it could be fight of the year. That was the best moment of this whole run. But to me, Gilbert Burns is still one of the best stories of the entire year. Just in general, I want to see what happens with this guy. That he started off the year and no one was looking at him as a welterweight title contender. And now he goes off and beats Damian Maia at the beginning of this pandemic, the first event that had no fans, and then follows that up with a performance that he had against Tyron Woodley. And I get it. A lot of people are looking at that fight saying Tyron Woodley is not Tyron Woodley anymore, but that's just not how I choose to look at it. I think Gilbert Burns is legit. I think his performances this year have been very, very eye-opening. And now you've got you got this great storyline. I am such a fan of teammate versus teammate fights. I mean, I think a lot of people in mixed martial arts, right? We like the drama of it. We like to see, what does that mean that these two guys have trained together for so long, and the camps are being forced to not really pick sides, but kind of, they need to be involved in this fight or not be involved in this fight. Usman has switched camps now. He's with Trevor Whitman. Trevor Whitman, one of the absolute best coaches in the entire sport. So you've got a guy who is a champion right now, making a switch potentially permanently in camps. So for me, it was still that Gilbert Burns performance against Tyron Woodley. And also just one other biggest takeaway, and you said it earlier, Ariel, is that the UFC has proved they can do this. And I think that we're not close to the end of this COVID experience. This is going to go on for a while. All these sports are going to continue to deal with it. I think the UFC is off to a very good, strong start in showing that they can do this. I was impressed just personally seeing the protocols firsthand. And so I think that they're off to a very good start.
Yeah, Mark, to that point, 8 cards in 8 weeks. We had that 1 week with 2 cards in the span of a few days, and just one fighter testing positive, Jacare Souza, prior to the first card, May 8th. It's pretty amazing when you see what else is going on in sports. What's a fight, a performance, a moment that stood out for you, Mark?
Definitely Gilbert Burns, as Brett mentioned, because during the pandemic era, he has become like the breakout star, right? Because his fight against Damian Maia was in that first event, the empty arena event in Brasilia. So that was kind of the first thing to kick him off, and then he had that big win. But also, UFC 250 was a really great card. Cody Garbrandt, that incredible, knockout from, I think he threw that punch from Reno, and he landed it on a sunset to knock him out. Aljamain Sterling's great performance in that fight. Sean O'Malley. Tonight Poirier versus Hooker was so good. I want to kick it even all the way back to the first card. How about Brandon Royval against Tim Elliott? One of my favorite fights of the last 2 months. I love that fight so much. The ground fighting was spectacular. It's been fun. The UFC has proven they can do it. The UFC has proven that they are better equipped than many other sports, if not every other sport, to do this kind of thing on many levels, because it's just a little bit more contained than the NBA, MLB, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been fun. It's good to have the UFC back. It feels like it's not quite normal, guys, but it feels like having fights and getting the ball rolling, and next month is going to be Fight Island. It feels like we're pretty close to things being at least adequate, if not ideal, but at least adequate now.
Yeah, and I'm appreciative for the fact that we have actual sporting events and results to talk about, unlike other sports who still seem to be, in the phase 1, so to speak, of trying to get back on track. I'll give a shout out to Aljamain Sterling. I thought his win over Corey Sandhagen at UFC 250 was phenomenal. So, all right, let's look ahead before we go to the events in Abu Dhabi. You've got July 11th. Of course, UFC 251, the 3 title fights on that card. Main event, Kamaru Usman against Gilbert Burns for the undisputed welterweight title. Co-main, Alexander Volkanovski against Max Holloway and his new hairdo, which his team tells me he is going to be rocking it on July 11th, which is phenomenal news. And, of course, Petr Yan against Jose Aldo for the vacant title. Then you got July 15th, Calvin Kattar against Dan Ige, very important fight in the 145-pound division. July 18th, you have Davison Figueiredo against Joseph Benavidez 2 for the vacant flyweight title. The first fight back in February was great, ended in some controversy. Of course, Davison missed weight as well, so they're going to run it back. And then the big one, July 25th, Darren Till going up against Robert Whittaker in a fight that everyone is looking forward to in the middleweight division, a huge fight between 2 fan favorites. Brett, I'll ask you, of all the fights, you don't have to pick the July 11th card, of all the fights coming up next month in Abu Dhabi, those 4 fight cards, which fight in particular are you most looking forward to?
It's the obvious answer, but I'll go with the main event. I like I said earlier, I like the teammate versus teammate angle of it, and I just like how good Burns has looked. And stylistically,
and this is of all the, you don't have to pick just that card, of all 4 cards.
Sure, yeah, I think so. I love the Calvin Kattar Dan Ige fight. I thought that I'm surprised that Calvin Kattar got that fight, to be honest with you. I thought that if I'm Calvin Kattar, I'm like, Dan Ige, really? Like, if I beat him, what does it really do for my career? If I lose to him, then I'm losing to a guy that's ranked well below me. But Calvin's been another guy almost like Gilbert Burns, and he's just rolled with the punches. He's wanted to stay active. He got a new contract out of it, so I'm very intrigued by that fight. But yeah, I like the main event, and I'll also say that I'm looking forward to seeing if this COVID situation has any say in, not even a say in that it determines the outcome, but I wonder if that's something that we'll be talking about next month, guys. Because if you look at the title fight The first one we got between Tony Ferguson and Justin Gaethje was a weird one. Tony had cut weight the week before, and Justin was on a very, very shortened camp. And then, Amanda Nunes and Felicia Spencer. I thought Felicia Spencer had a chance in that fight, but if we're being honest, Amanda Nunes was quite a big favorite in that fight. But here you've got 3 title fights on the same card, where all these guys had, maybe probably not a full long camp, but they had time to prepare. And I just wonder if, someone like Alex Volkanovski doing it not at City Kickboxing and doing Zoom meetings with his coach, Max Holloway, the fact that I think that they feel pretty confident that they're kind of well suited for something like this, because they have a small team. They have a small contained team in Hawaii. Kamaru Usman changing his camp and traveling during this pandemic. I just wonder if that will become part of the narrative. Almost like in the other sports, where we're going to be talking about, oh, this team won the championship, or was it with an asterisk, or did the team just win because they were able to stay healthier than all the other teams? We really haven't talked about that a ton so far in these initial cards. I wonder, with such a high profile and 3 title fights on the same card, if that's going to be at least part of the discussion. I'm not saying it's going to be the entire discussion, but it's going to be, these are world-class championship fights, and how are these guys able to train during it? I think that's something we're going to be talking about.
And Mark, of course, everyone buzzing tonight after Dana White posted a picture of the octagon on the beach. I'm not sure if I should be a Debbie Downer or not, but I don't think the fights are actually going to be taking place there. But great promotion once again. I think that might be like a training promotional, but very nice. It's a great scene. Everyone can get excited about that. It is.
I hope they're not on the beach, because it'll be very, very hot if the fights are actually on the beach and not in a more air conditioned facility.
It's all very secretive. Mark, which fight are you most looking forward to next month?
I want to give a shout out to the king of the coronavirus pandemic, king of quarantine, Darren Till himself. Because every time I see a photo of a human being's face now on the internet, I think of what Darren Till's face would look like in their face. Maybe no one knows the hell I'm talking about, but if you follow Darren Till on any social media outlet, whatever, he's brightened, I think, everyone's day by being just absolutely absurd. Maybe not Mike Perry. He probably hasn't brightened Mike Perry's day over the last few months, but I really look forward to seeing Darren Till versus Robert Whittaker. I really want to see Robert Whittaker back. It's his first fight, since he lost to Israel Adesanya. I still think he's one of the very best fighters in the world in any weight class. And Darren Till is just always entertaining in and outside the octagon. So I'm looking forward to that fight. There are so many good ones. I mean, I can't wait for Peter Yan versus Jose Aldo. Maybe Aldo doesn't really deserve the bantamweight title shot, but that fight is going to just be incredible. And Max Holloway versus Alexander Volkanovski. That first fight was so good, so technical, so close. I really look forward to seeing how those guys are going to do it again. And to Brett's point, every fight, especially the highest level fights, have to be looked at under a little bit of a microscope because of the pandemic, and we have to see how everyone is preparing. And these little things can make big differences in tight, elite level fights. So it's going to be very interesting, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited for July, that whole slate.
Yeah, we also get the return of Rose Namajunas, potentially Paige Van Zandt's final UFC fight, Alexander Gustafsson moving up to heavyweight against Fabricio Verdum. A lot to talk about, a lot to look forward to as far as July is concerned. Next weekend, no UFC, a very rare off weekend for the promotion. It is July 4th, so if you're celebrating, happy Independence Day to all of you. And if you're celebrating on July 1st, Canada Day, happy Canada Day to all of you as well. All right, we're out of time. Thank you very much to Brett in Las Vegas, Mark in Los Angeles. I'm Ariel. We appreciate you guys watching our coverage for all the events at the UFC Apex. We now turn the page and look forward to the events in Abu Dhabi. For now, though, we'll say goodnight. Thank you so much. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you're all safe, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.